We are live.
Welcome everyone to Connected Learning TV. This is the fourth and final webinar of our April 2015 series titled Connected Learning in the Classroom, Conversations from the Field. We've talked with a third grade class, that was exciting, and two pretty interesting high school classes. And I'll have to say, I have done dozens of these, and this is the one that excites me the most. We're going to meet with 8 of my best students from my years at Berkeley and Stanford. So if you're watching this, please take a moment to share it with your networks. I'm Howard Rheingold. I taught at Berkeley and Stanford for 10 years. I've done a number of these webinars, and I'm going to host today. Throughout this series on Connected Learning TV, we've been chatting with a variety of educators who are using connected learning in the classroom. We've been talking with them directly from the classroom to see what that looks like on the ground. Today we're taking a somewhat different approach. We'll be talking with a group of my former students from Stanford and from Berkeley who have gone on to do a wide range of great things, and we'll be discussing their experiences with co-learning in the classroom and how that connects to the projects they're working on now. Before we dive into the chat, let's go over a couple of quick details. To those watching live right now, we welcome your comments and questions either via the Twitter hashtag #ConnectedLearning or the Q&A feature that you should see within the video player. We'll do our best to address your questions here in the Google Hangout. And before we begin, I'd like to give our guests a chance to introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Tracy and work our way down the line. And don't forget to unmute if you're muted.
Hi, I'm Tracy. Currently, I'm still a student at Stanford. I'm majored in anthropology, and I'm co-terming in media studies. I think what was great about taking Howard's class was not only the chance to collaborate with my classmates and also to teach in a class at least for an hour or two throughout the whole class, but also to learn that social media isn't just something that you do for leisure. It can be used as a learning tool, and for me that's important because I thought, for cooking or learning about the deep web, all I had to do was Google, but there are a lot of tools out there to help you really aggregate it, and social media is a great way to search for new things.
Thank you. Stephanie Parker.
Hi everyone, my name's Stephanie, and I am also a graduate of the Stanford Media Studies co-term program. While I was at Stanford, I had a chance to take some of Howard's amazing classes, both in person and online, and I also wrote a thesis on online anonymity with Howard as my advisor. That was a great experience. Currently, I work on the news team at YouTube, and happy to be here.
And I'm sure you noticed the news today that the startup Secret has gone under.
Yes.
Because anonymity did not work well for them.
Right. I still have hope for it, though. Not Secret, but anonymity. Anyways.
Stephanie Lepp.
Yes. Hi. My name is Stephanie Lepp. I am an artist and a strategist, fired up by the art of intimate human connection. I produce Daybreaker, which is an early morning dance movement in cities worldwide and a pretty euphoric way to start the day. I'm also a research affiliate at the Institute for the Future. I somehow missed Howard while I was at Stanford, but luckily I caught up with him while I was a graduate student at Berkeley and had the pleasure of both being a student of his and also getting to teach with him. And I'm looking forward to co-learning about co-learning with all of you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Lauren, you got all set up now?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yay! My name is Lauren Kelly. I am also a graduate of the Media Studies program at Stanford, and I took Howard's classes as well. Right now I'm a marketing and content professional in San Francisco, and I actually, the job I recently left, but I worked there for about 2 years, was a content curation platform, which was so in line with what I learned from Howard's classes. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
Laura?
Laura?
Hi. So I guess, Howard, I probably had you as an instructor at Stanford probably 2 years ago, maybe. But I guess our paths would have probably crossed prior at Wired, where I worked for about 12 years. I used to work as a journalist, went back to school, and I'm in the process of finishing a Learning Sciences Technology Design program this June, and we'll start working at SF State in August.
All right. Catherine? Catherine, you need to unmute.
I had the good fortune to come across Howard's class at exactly the point that I was going from. I'd been in about a 4-year process with the Nueva schools of designing their new high school, in particular curriculum development. And that had been preceded by 6 or 7 years of me being an avid digital immigrant and kind of plunging myself everywhere I could. And at the point that I was considering and had been authorized to teach an elective to the incoming freshmen about digital media learning, I encountered Howard's class and definitely felt like I got everything and more there that I needed, and it was quite thrilling. So that's my history with this.
Thank you, Catherine. Johan, you're up.
Yeah, so I'm an interaction designer at Google right now. I work in the robotics department, and I met Harvard at Stanford, where I also did my thesis on online credibility and trust, where he helped me as an advisor. And I was in the same class as Brian as well, so we have a good fortune of connecting with a lot of interesting people and good friends there. So, yep.
Thank you. Brian?
Hi, everybody. My name is Brian. I just finished a PhD in education at Stanford. I met Howard through his social media classroom, which gave me a framework for thinking about and understanding a number of things: networks, participation, collaboration, community. It was a really transformative experience for me. I currently work at Kumu, which is an innovation lab and acceleration program in Berkeley.
Okay, so we're talking about co-learning in a hybrid environment. Hybrid environment means that we all met face-to-face every week, but we also used a variety of social media when we weren't meeting face-to-face. About the co-learning part, let's talk about that. Laura, let's begin by defining what we mean by co-learning. Why don't you describe it in your own words?
My own words. Well, I think of co-learning where often the roles are maybe not how most people think of them in terms of the educator, the teacher, and the students, where students are just, they have much more agency and really kind of can take on the notion of where do they want to go with their learning? Why are they there? Kind of what are their goals? And, you know, just a real way, I think, for active engagement and to kind of, on a very practical level, let an individual say, what do I need or what do I want to get out of this experience? And how can I kind of make it of value to me?
You know, something that I've learned is that if you were to ask me to define co-learning, I would say facilitate student agency would be my shortest description of it. It sounds a little simplistic, but if you haven't been in a school environment lately, they are still oriented towards teaching students rather than students taking the lead in learning. And we saw this month high school students. If you haven't seen those episodes, go check them out. These are high school students where the teachers much braver than I ever was, trusted their students implicitly and said, you go find something that's really interesting to you and we'll build the learning around that. And it turns out to really work. What about that co-learning experience? Does anybody want to jump in about any connection between that experience and what you are doing out in the real world, the post-school world? Stephanie Lepp, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, this is a little more on your last point, but I see co-learning kind of within the context of this concept of prosumption, which is a concept developed by a futurist named Alvin Toffler. I might have even learned about it in one of your classes. He developed this concept in, I think, the early 80s to describe the process of consumers being a part of actively producing whatever it is that they consume. And we see this, in, let's say, with threadless tees, as people who are designing their own t-shirts, or See Click Fix, or other kind of government 2.0 efforts of kind of citizens being a part of their own governance. And within the context of education, co-learning is this way, basically, that learners become an active part of kind of like producing or creating their own educational process. So I guess I see it as kind of a manifestation of a trend that is happening kind of across the board, across industries, across realms of human activity, of just us moving from being more kind of like passive parts of our learning process or any kind of consumption process to just being much more active.
Lauren, you wanted to jump in on that?
Yeah, coming into the workforce out of Stanford, one of the cool things about being in a small company, which is what I worked with a small team for about 2 years, was something they really emphasized was a high level of integration and a flattened hierarchy. And so I saw a lot of co-learning tenets reflected in my workplace, which was really exciting. So the executives were more facilitators, and everyone had a voice in productivity and contributions to features and all that kind of good stuff. So that was exciting for me to see.
It seemed pretty clear to me that being very good at being taught, which is what all of the students that I encountered were skilled at, was not going to be sufficient in the workplace, where they were going to be learning new things and collaborating on a daily basis, and they weren't going to have time to go back to school. So it seemed to me that the old liberal arts notion of learning how to learn was an important part of what we were doing. Laura, you had a specific project to tell us.
Yeah, one thing I was just going to mention, I've been really excited by some work I've been doing. I've been watching others, actually. Actually, Berkeley has a big conference starting tomorrow, but on kind of historical thinking, but digital textbooks. And actually, I think that's a good example of where the students get to kind of rewrite history based on primary sources, so working with archives, because there's so much online. And that's just, I think it's one of those projects where it's content creation, which I think has a level of engagement, but then agency, where students can really kind of pick what they want. And for, just as an example of, that kind of sweet spot of content, technology, and then the ability to kind of in a classroom setting let students kind of go figure out what they want to do, which I think to your point earlier, that's that can be tough for a teacher. It can be loud. It can, it can go in all different directions. So, it's like, for me, it was one of those nice, manageable projects.
One of the things I was never able to get to, it's kind of difficult, but wouldn't it be ideal if maybe for a couple of weeks at the end of the summer, we could all get together and I could say, here are the different themes that we want to learn about, and here are the texts that I've found out about. Why don't you go out and find your own, and why don't we all get together and make the syllabus together, and not just co-teach, but co-create the syllabus, co-create the textbooks. I would love to see that happening. There's difficulty. Who wants to give up part of their summer to do that? If you've got a quarter system like Stanford, it's a little bit difficult. With a semester system like they have at Berkeley, you could conceivably spend the first 3 weeks of a 15-week semester putting the course together. Teacher knows the subject. I mean, obviously you don't know the subject yet, you're the students, but you have judgment. You can help put it together. Maybe we'll see that happen in the future. What about the role of social media in our classes? Someone want to speak to that?
I mean, I just wanted to add a point to the other thing you just mentioned before. I think it's going from school environment into your workforce and being able to work with other people at a much higher level and a much more like a higher grade of autonomy. I think it's so important to stress that the learning of being able to listen, being able to formulate your thoughts and the things you need to learn in order for you to complete your job. And especially like this day and age, it sort of sounds almost cliche at this point, but I think it's worth stressing that getting good at learning, getting good at absorbing other people's knowledge, getting good at formulating your own assumptions about the thing you're about to the endeavor you're about to undertake is sort of much more crucial than the immediate facts that you'll learn in any textbook, I think, right? So it's sort of a process of learning, right? And especially once we go out in the tech and things change rapidly, right? New jobs come online and new people and different processes and so on. Just being able to adapt, I think it's such a crucial part of it. And I think that's where co-learning is sort of this very powerful process.
What about our use of social media? We had forums, we had blogs, we had wikis, we had social bookmarking.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that it was an interesting use of social media. I remember we were trying out forums for a bit, and then we switched to Facebook because it seems that Facebook is such an integrated part of most of our lives already. And I think what was great about that is that since we're always on Facebook, it was easy for us to also check up on our Facebook group. And what I liked about it was that whenever you came across an article or something you thought the class would be relevant to the class, it was easy to just post it on there. And it was nice to see how much people participated by commenting on what people posted. And I think even though we tried the forum and it was like a little slower, it was easily used on Facebook. And I think the blog posts for me were important because when people read stuff and they posted comments, it was in addition to something that I learned. So for an example, I was really interested in following lots of different blogs about cooking, but someone else posted and said, oh, you should use Instagram too. There are a lot of people who post like recipes in their food on Instagram. Like there was a Weight Watcher girl who posted her progress. So just showing me different types of ways in which I could access my interests, that was something that I got from people posting on my blogs, but also reading about how people are using the same tools that Howard introduced us, but in different ways. That was also really interesting and really helpful for my learning.
We also learned a lot about different tools from each other. I think I should add for everybody who wasn't in our classes that the students were teachers, and we had co-teaching teams who spent about a third of the class teaching with me, and we also had learner lectures. And I started out the learner lectures by asking students to select one of the recommended readings that they weren't required to read that spoke to them and to tell us about them. But what that evolved into was students, co-learners, coming up with something that wasn't necessarily on our syllabus, but was relevant. So we learned about Vine culture, and I know what Vine is, but I didn't know about Vine stars being paid $25,000 for a product placement in a 6-second video, and about all-star get-togethers of 6-second video stars, and I knew about Tumblr a little bit. I've got a couple of Tumblrs, but a student who was really immersed in Tumblr culture introduced us to this whole world. It was the world she introduced us to was mostly female, a little snarky in a kind of intellectual way, and not in that kind of trolling way, and very fast moving. They were just glimpses of parts of the social media landscape that many of us, not just I, were not really familiar with before. And I think again that has to carry over into the workplace and into the after school world. So many tools and places and social scenes pop up every day. How do you figure out which ones are worth paying attention to? Well, you learn it from other people, and you introduce it to other people. Catherine, I wanted to ask you specifically, since when you applied for the class, you were designing this class for high school students. What did you take away from our experience that ended up being useful in your Nueva classroom? Nueva High School in Nueva School in Hillsborough was a fantastic school.
Yeah, I would love to speak to that. One of the comments I would make just in general about co-learning and the kind of classroom you ran and the kind of classroom I was doing at Nueva is one of the things that I think makes it work and makes it easily go into co-learning is that if you complexify what's going on in the classroom enough and make the complexity that people are living already obvious enough, then by default no one is going to be the expert at everything. So for instance, in your class, my background coming heavily out of the social sciences, my main interests have always been, and most of my learning has been, about the dynamics between people face-to-face and social dynamics. So the part of it that has to do with how people are interacting with each other is very natural to me, and I can kind of hold forth on that. On the other hand, the tools themselves were mostly brand new to me, and I definitely was a rank beginner there. As soon as I think in terms of, that book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, for me it's always Digital Mind, Beginner's Mind. So what I found translating it to the high school students is I intentionally threw open the gate in terms of a lot of complexity. I wanted them to learn the tools, and what I found, and I imagine most high school teachers find, is that we have this image of high school students that they know everything about technology, but in fact, like the rest of us, they know one or two of their favorite things, and the rest of it they don't know. So I wanted them to learn about tools they didn't know about, and I also wanted them to observe the social dynamics. So for example, the social dynamics of the class changed as they started to use their forum posts, and that was very, very reminiscent of what I experienced in your class, was that these various modalities of interacting with each other were synergistic, and the relationships were built in a different way than they're built when you just have face-to-face interactions.
Catherine, would you characterize the difference between the forum post and the blog post and the face-to-face conversation?
Yeah, more I would say I noticed the difference between the face-to-face and the forum and blog. So what I saw, I experimented in one class, as I think we did in your class, with actually having them do forum posts in the classroom. So a subgroup would go off and start posting to each other on the forum, and the rest of us would be doing something else and then check back in. And of course, it's almost like we have a lot of different selves, and we're different depending on who we're in the room with, but we're also different depending on the media that we're using to translate ourselves. So of course, a piece of, let's just say, David the student. David would be one student when he was in front of the group live, and would be a little bit more reticent and shy and diplomatic, let's say. But you put David onto the forum posting, and he gets much more adventuresome. He starts to learn about how to contain his adventuresomeness within the bounds of making the forum post work for everybody, and the kind of guidelines that you taught us about what are the best possible social norms for electronic, social media. So you would just see a much more multifaceted picture of a person emerge more quickly. I would say the same thing might happen over, a years-long relationship, but it shortened that time, I thought, for people to bring out different parts of themselves. Is that what you were asking about?
Yes, I was thinking about as you were talking about the different voices that the different media uh, enable. When you're in the classroom, it's a little bit of a formal performance, mostly for the teacher, but
Yeah,
you know, for the other students.
right.
In the forum, what I try to encourage, and what springs up if there's sufficient mutual interest, is a voice of the group. What is it that
Mm-hmm.
we as a group want to get into? I remember one of the early classes I taught at Berkeley was when Napster was around, and someone started a thread on is Napster really stealing, and do you use it? And there were hundreds of posts. It was obviously something that people had a voice about, and they weren't individually sure. They weren't making presentations. They were trying to find it out. The blogs I introduce as being individual voice. Here's your opportunity to find some aspect of what we're learning about and reflect on it for others and have others comment on that as well. And then we come back into class having spent the week discussing as a group or as individuals various aspects of the text. And I think that brings up the questions: why go to all the trouble of being in the same place at the same time? We can put my lectures on YouTube. We can meet on Hangouts. And I think that makes us pay a lot more attention to each other when we're in the classroom. And one of the things that I learned early is that students don't come into the classroom knowing each other, and quite often they leave a course without knowing each other. And I think one of the reasons to go to all the trouble of being in the same place together is to get to know each other, and that aspect of cooperative learning, of knowing what other people are interested in and telling them about things that you've found out about, is, I think, something that's much more part of the world now than it used to be, now that we have all of these media coming at us. Johan, you had something you wanted to jump in with, and then Stephanie?
Yeah, sure. Just on the social media bit, I think reflecting back when I was at your class in 2009, I think a lot of things have happened in that space. When we were doing it, it was much more, it was sort of a curiosity, right? We sort of approached it. We had our own social media classroom with a bunch of different the sort of Twitter feeds and the forum posts and so on and so forth. And today, like was just mentioned, it's Facebook, and there's some big players out there. And I think coming at it today, and especially if someone's listening in today about developing a course for students today, I think it's a given. You need to understand what's going on. Like, people coming out at the workforce will use Facebook and Hangouts and Slack and all these other means of cooperating and working together, right? And there's sort of underpinning modalities, right? Like, how do you speak to each other in an email? How do you speak to each other on a forum post, and so on and so forth? And I think that is sort of a given. Whereas when we were doing it back in 2009, I think it was a little less clear how that would steer. And I think today it's obvious that we're in this world, and why not understand it better and really hit at it.
You know, one of the things about co-learning is that it's not just the students learning together, it's the teacher learning as well. And I think one of the things that I learned, I mentioned before, is facilitate student agency. And I'd say that the other thing that I learned is to listen to the students as early as possible and find out what they know that you and the others need to know. I taught another course, none of you were in it, on digital journalism, and I realized after a while that there were usually one or maybe two people in the class who were more advanced than I am about digital media. So I had the advantage of teaching this course in the winter quarter, and I would ask the fall quarter teachers of the journalism students who are the ones who are the most advanced, and then I would have lunch with them before our course started. And I remember one of them, who works for Vice now, said, all of your students need to be able to install WordPress and configure it on a server. And I said, okay, that sounds good. Teach me how to do it. So he taught me how to do it, and a week later I was teaching the students how to do it. And a few of you from recent years, I know Tracy, during the summer, before the fall course started, I sent out instructions saying, I want you to claim a domain and install and configure WordPress and start your own blog, and we will aggregate that. So learning from your students, I think this digital native stuff, we all know that just because you're of a certain age does not mean that you know everything. But increasingly, as a teacher, you have to recognize that every student coming into your classroom knows something that you don't know. And the co-learning gets pretty exciting when that goes both ways. I'm not going to let you down. I know the subject matter, and I'm going to help you explore things that you wouldn't have otherwise. But I also have to leave some space open for you to teach the rest of us. So Stephanie, Stephanie Leff, you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah. Well, the conversation has gone in a few other directions, but I will add two things. Yeah, on that, I appreciate that you call yourself the expert learner. It's a very humble way to consider what your role is. But yeah, I just wanted to reflect on just how refreshing the kind of experimental nature of Howard's approach and co-learning is. We're playing with this very old pedagogy intention with new technology, and that is the tension that Howard is really kind of actively and collaboratively and like experimentally resolving. And ultimately, all teaching is an experiment. It's all an experiment. It's just that Howard and, let's say, co-learning is like explicit and scientific about it, in asking what is actually working, or what's the difference between face-to-face and blogs and forums, and how can I actually like learn from that and incorporate that into my teaching. And on that, on the difference between the different media, it used to be, let's say, when it was all face-to-face, that like that was all we had, so that's all we could use. But now that there are so many channels available to us, we really need to kind of understand under what circumstances or for what purposes are face-to-face versus Twitter versus Facebook versus all these other channels more and less effective. We tried to do something like that, I think, in a project in participatory media and collective action, kind of for collective action, thinking about which kinds of channels or social media are more and less useful for which purposes. But it's that kind of like experimental mindset that we need to take, because we have so many options available to us, and we just need to be more experimental and more thoughtful about which ones are more useful for what topics and what ultimately kind of learning objectives.
I think, again, talking about a meta skill, something that I realized over 10 years, things have changed. YouTube is only 10 years old. It just got started when I got started. Facebook came in the middle of when I was teaching. When you all started school, you pretty much had to go to school to learn. There are stone carvings from ancient Samaria that show a teacher standing up in front of a bunch of students who all have their little tablets. Schools have had a monopoly on learning for thousands of years, and in the last 20 years, particularly the last 10 years, the information and the knowledge and the communication channels have come along that have broken that monopoly. Schooling certainly does train us to expect to be taught, and a few independent learners have always been able to learn on their own. But I would bet that if you were to ask a random sample of 14-year-olds around the world, how would you learn the ukulele or configure a web server, they would say, I'd go search YouTube first. The meta skill of being able to pick up the tools that are available, to find the knowledge that you need to find, to put together a personal learning network to help you learn, I think those are going to become much more important And I think it's a very different discourse from the one when the MOOCs came along and there was all this hype about we're going to put teachers' lectures on YouTube, and then we're going to have automated quizzes, and this is going to replace universities. I think that's looking through the telescope from the wrong end. The right end of the telescope to look at is we've got all these fantastic tools for learning. While we have the mandate to teach students all day long, they're under our control, let's help them learn on their own, because they're going to have decades of more knowledge and more tools and more necessity for learning ahead of them, and giving them not just the abilities but the sense of agency to do that, I think, is an exciting mandate that we have now that we didn't have before. So let's see, Brian, you had something on creating projects you wanted to add.
Yeah, I like I like so much of what everyone's saying. One of the things that I want to say is I think we've moved towards projects. We've moved towards we need to help young people clarify and envision projects that resonate with them, that are based on their interests, and to give them the tools to connect with people out in the world. I think so much of schooling is about. I mean, what's the scariest thing for a teacher? To not know what's going to happen. The system relies on the lesson plan. We have all these. The schooling system is a system of control, and I think a lot of people who know about digital media, they don't understand about the way schools are organized and the way schools hinder and limit the potential of digital learning, connected learning. So I would, for me, it's about, like, there's a new website called Pathbright, which helps people with portfolios. I think that's a real key, is helping people create a vision and put together a team and connect them with the resources and give them the tools to organize and to execute a project. And one example is a friend of mine did a dissertation on Wiki Marion, and Marion, Indiana, has an ugly history of lynching and racial violence, and the teacher there does a group collaborative project where they write about the history of Marion, Indiana, and that to me is a good example that provides some. It provides structure, it provides people a way to work together, and it contributes publicly, which is a word that I got from John Walensky. What is the public value of the pedagogy? I got a lot of words from Howard, but from John, it was open and public.
All right, thank you. Laura, can you add something about lifelong learning and how do we ingrain that idea with students?
Yeah, well, actually, Brian, really made me, remember, like, so much of, I think when you're in a classroom, it's thinking, what are the learning goals or the pedagogical goals for, like, that moment? And really so much of learning, it's kind of, trying to instill in students, like, these are the skills or just even the interest or gumption that you're going to need for lifelong learning. And to really kind of, often I think as a teacher you see students like, what do I have to do to get the grade? Or what do I have to do to get this project done? Or I want to do this. And to really, kind of while they're, if those things are important to them, while they're solving for those, also to think, like, what are the skills or elements or even mindset that I need for lifelong learning, and really kind of figuring out how to instill that curiosity and agency to have people realize, like, what you're learning now, the skills, the tools, the technology, certainly it may change, but how are you going to use that later in life, and how are you going to set up almost like kind of that personal lifelong syllabus of what are my interests, what are my passions, and how do I get to that next place?
Stephanie Parker has something to add to that, and then we'll jump to Johan. And I want to say that simply asking a student to pick a project that they feel is significant in the world is really the beginning of that lifelong learning. They're so used to being handed assignments. asking yourself what's important enough for me to work on, I think, is a very important thing to do when you're setting out in the world. And Stephanie asked some good questions about important things to work on, and we had a great time working on them together. So go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, sure. I am just remembering being in your class for the first few weeks. These are all Stanford students, very bright, very good at being taught and learning, and very interested in digital media communities and stuff. But it was like pulling teeth to get us to write a blog, or to get us to do anything that didn't have an immediately visible like goal or result or assessment. I think we're all used to going for the grade, like Laura talked about, and when we would ask you about what's on the test, how are you grading us, and you said, well, I don't know, I don't really like tests, I don't really like grades, maybe we won't, maybe we I think there was a bit of fear there about going into an unknown area and having more power and more agency than we're used to, even as the brightest college students. So I just remember the blogging piece, as it was really hard in the beginning, but we got into a nice rhythm with it, and then moved to the forums, and then moved to Facebook. But I think that exercise was important, just handing over the agency back to the students. It was just a small task, but it had big significance for me and the other students.
It's interesting you should say that, Stephanie, that it was difficult at the beginning, because I remember when you ended up doing your honors thesis on anonymity, I urged you to publish it, and I still point people to it when they have arguments about anonymity. You did just a great job. And then when I was organizing a project with volunteers around the world on pedagogy about how do we teach each other without a teacher. You did a great literature review for us. So you went a long ways from being somewhat nonplussed about choosing your own project to being able to do really great independent work. And we saw with our high school students that when you cut them loose to do that, they get very passionate about it. Catherine, did you have something to say about that, with high school students choosing their own projects?
Yeah, probably just a ditto. That I thought the class really took hold, and I had intended to leave a smaller portion of the class for personal projects, but when I realized that they were a bit overwhelmed by all the different things I was presenting them with and all the different things they were talking about, I encouraged them to go ahead and start their personal projects, and the topics they came up with were so varied. One person wanted to study the shut-in phenomenon in Japan and did an excellent presentation about that. Another person studied what's known about the uncanny valley phenomenon. Another person did a calculus type analysis of video games and what were the elements that made video games the most popular, and it just went on. So every project was vastly, one pair paired up to do a market analysis of high-tech stocks. So it was just kind of amazing, and definitely, and of course the meta message there is to point them back in the direction of the idea that as soon as you get your own curiosity involved, that's really the teacher.
Yes, and if you choose a subject that is somewhat removed from the syllabus, that's where the challenge is to the teacher. How can you facilitate them learning skills that are connected to the syllabus in pursuit of their passion project? And at that stage, both the student and the teacher are being challenged, and that's, I think, is a lot more exciting than the normal business model of teaching. Is you spend a lot of time working out your syllabus and your lectures, and then you kind of run that for years and years and years. For every student and every class meeting to be a new challenge for the teacher, that's infectious for the students as well. Okay, Johan, you had something you wanted to jump in with?
Yeah, just to reflect on that and what Brian said as well. I think the whole the fact that you can get niche learning, the fact that you can get projects that are extremely limited, maybe only, I don't know, 10 people in the world that care about this specific topic, or this only sees it this way, through the connected learning, through social media, through this broader sort of outreach, you actually get that, right? So if you go to Stanford, even it's the brightest students and all that stuff, you might just end up with people who don't see that way of world, right? You don't have the same interest, you don't necessarily share that same niche interest. And I think being connected online, being connected through other means, give you this long tail of interests. And so suddenly it's the responsibility that traditionally has been on the teacher to sort of go and dig deep in the library and find the books and whatnot, has suddenly been spread across a much wider range of people and tools, because now it's up to the student, for herself or himself, to go out and pursue that passion and pursue that curiosity and find the means to the project, right? To find the people who can help and to understand the subject. And I think that's really, it's not the MOOC, like you mentioned, it's not the MOOC that actually is the powerful turnaround. I think it's the fact that we now can direct our attention to much smaller and much more sort of specific and curiosity-driven projects.
Laura, you had something to add about grades and learning.
Yeah, well, I think actually what Johan just said is really a nice point of, you know, I often find when you're looking at a classroom, you can see the students who are kind of the academic animals, the students who are like, I've been trained to do this, I just need to figure out what I need to do. And so I often think grades set a very low bar, because the student's going to say, I need a B, I need an A. A's are pretty easy to get. How am I going to do that? Where, you know, I think always that trick is for the student to kind of really, you know, kind of have that question, what's good? What does good look like? And let's remove it from this notion of whether you're going to get an A, B, whatever, and kind of force them to kind of maybe look to that long tail to say, with this particular passion, what does good look like? Because it's probably going to look, you know, radically different than, you know, some, you know, rubric for getting a grade. And I think often it's that trick, and Howard, I think you do this very well of, you know, there's those classes where students walk in and they think, okay, this is a class where I'm just going to get a grade and I'm going to move on. And then this is a class where you're going to be forced to kind of go at this on a level of a passion or an obsession or just a commitment that, you know, it's where, you know, students find, wow, this one class is taking, you know, 80% of my time, rather than some of these other classes where I just tick through the motions or the rubric.
You know, I think I've told you all this, that they talk about formative assessment and normative assessment. Formative assessment is when you taste the soup to see whether it needs more salt, and normative assessment is when the restaurant critic comes in and tastes the soup to see whether to give you 3 stars in the newspaper or not. And almost all of the assessment that grades offer is normative assessment. We need to do a lot more of tasting the soup to see, you know, what you need, what more you need to do, and what you're doing well. So Lauren, you had something to add.
Yeah, I think you know, when you're working in a group, especially in a co-learning environment, that really helps. You know, what Laura was saying about, you know, students who maybe just want to meet the minimum to get a B or an A. When you have a group of 3 or 4 students working together on a project that they're all excited about, it helps to kind of raise that bar, because everyone's, you know, sort of assessing each other as the project is moving along. And you know, one of the things I loved about our classes where we were doing group projects and stuff was that we, you know, we kind of held each other accountable, and we're always, you know, QAing parts of the project for each other, which, you know, if you're working alone and you're just trying to meet the bare minimum for a grade, you might, you know, you wouldn't get that feedback. So.
Well, one thing I learned about collaboration is that many students hate collaboration because there's always a slacker and there's always the people who do all the work. So as the class evolved, from what I was learning from you was that a collaborative group needs to make a charter in which they make promises to each other about what they're going to do. They need to establish milestones so that they can prove to each other that they're doing it. And they need to continuously communicate so that what they don't have is like 4 somewhat related separate projects, but 4 parts of an integral project. So forcing students to collaborate is always a failure unless you can build in some means of them being accountable to each other and communicating with each other about it. You know, in the few minutes I have left, I know that there are other things I'm sure that you have to say, but I have a question for you, which is the last course that I had. Tracy was in this. It was my last class. So after 4 sessions, I wrote down on the whiteboard all of the many things, you may remember, all of the moving parts that I expected from students, and I wrote that in blue. And then I said, you know what's going on. Redesign the course. If you have questions for me, here's my phone number. You can text me. And then I left the room, and I probably got a dozen texts and gave it a dozen answers. And I came back to the room, and in red they had revised the assignment. We had moved from a forum to Facebook, and they decided to move it to Reddit, for example. It was a smaller than usual class, so they eliminated the collaborative projects. We don't really have enough time left for me to just leave the room at this point, but here's a question I would have of you, which is, I'm no longer teaching in classes. I really cherish the interaction with you, particularly with the students who really got it. You are, like me, out in the world, and you don't have enough time in your day. What, if anything, would be worth finding an hour a month or every 6 weeks to get together again, maybe with a reading and doing some co-learning? Would that be in the cards? If so, what would be worth going to all that trouble, carving out that time to do that? I'm willing to spend my time at it with you, but I know how tough it is out there these days. You do not want to devote an hour of your time for a hangout plus whatever time it takes to do the reading and the thinking, unless it's going to be useful to you. Maybe you won't have the answer immediately, but look, I'm opening the floor to brainstorming.
I have kind of a dorky academic suggestion, and I guess in the spirit of doing something that's kind of project oriented or something that has some kind of an outcome. One question that came to mind while we were kind of thinking through the questions for this hangout was, under which circumstances or for which learning goals is co-learning most effective? Right now we're in an era of, everything is participatory and everything is, enabling people to actively co-create. And that's fabulous and incredible and certainly useful for many kinds of learning experiences, and possibly not for all of them. My husband went through medical school, and perhaps part of that could have been co-learning, but like some of that just needs to be like straight up, he needs to just get that information into his head. And so one potential thing that I think would be really fun to do together is to make some kind of a visual or snapshot of different models of learning or different philosophies or approaches to learning, and really kind of try to articulate or illustrate for which kinds of learning goals or topics they are most effective. And I'm thinking of a matrix I've seen that's similar for different styles of leadership, where, when the ship is sinking and you're in an emergency situation, you need to shift into like super dictatorial kinds of leadership. And you do that in order to, alleviate the emergency, stop the ship from sinking, and then you can shift into more of a democratic or affiliative style of leadership, for example. So it's one nerdy request that I think might be useful both for us and more broadly for teachers and learners alike.
problem solving of things that you didn't anticipate is such a big part of the work world, whether you're in a startup or in an established company. You come in thinking that you've got a plan, you've got a vision, and then there's a hole below the waterline, and you've got to go down and fix it, and it wasn't there last night, and it wasn't in your plan today. Other ideas?
I have something, just being out of school for a couple of years now, I find myself really missing that intellectual stimulation in my day-to-day life. And so maybe to get a little meta, talking about ways where we can co-learn and continue to, pick projects of some sort and follow them, after the classroom, after we have, school sort of as our structure in life. Once we're free or whatever, how do we continue to learn from one another?
I would love to get involved in that, because I am trying to learn things that I know nothing about. I'm trying to learn woodworking, electronics, and coding, and doing it alone is very difficult, and finding people to learn with is part of it. If you're interested, email me, and I will contact a couple of others who weren't able to join us today, and if there is sufficient interest, maybe we'll create a Google Doc or a Quip Doc and see whether we can come up with something that would be mutually beneficial. I know I really enjoyed people coming in and doing their 5-minute or 10-minute learner lectures on the things that they have learned and know about, and the rest of us have an opportunity to talk about it. Laura, anything else? I mean, we're all in different places here. We've got robotics, we've got education, we've got media, we've got Stephanie's creating, social movements.
I'll add a vote for Lauren's recommendation. I love the idea of a co-learning community where we're all just learning our own thing and really just holding each other accountable to our own learning process, whatever it is that we're learning about. I like that. It's meta and it makes sense. We don't all necessarily, Howard can be doing woodworking, I can be learning about complementary currencies, whatever it is that you're interested in, and what ties us together is just the process of co-learning and holding us accountable to our own co-learning goals. So I vote for that.
And I would say that the challenge to me would be to weave together those separate goals and see if we can find some kind of texts that would be useful to all of us. Wouldn't that be interesting? I'm thinking of there's a book called Shop Class as Soulcraft, about how old apprentice-style learning is now important. So this has been a great conversation. I hope it's actually the beginning of some more conversations among us. I hope it's useful for educators out there who want to dive into connected learning. There will be a full video recording of the Hangout available immediately at connectedlearning.tv with other curated content on the way that you can share with your network. If any of you have URLs that you want added to that curated content, send it to our producer Liana and she'll add it to that page. So this wraps up the final webinar of our April 2015 series, but please feel free to keep the energy going around this conversation using the hashtag Connected Learning on Twitter. Feel free to follow me on Twitter with the username hreingold. And if you found this conversation helpful, please share it with your networks. And if you'd like to know more about upcoming webinars from Connected Learning TV in 2015, visit connectedlearning.tv and sign up for the email newsletter. It was so great to see your faces again. Good luck out in the world. I hope I see each and every one of you in person. And onward.
Bye.
Thanks.